Okay, Rebecca Keegan, her new biography on James Cameron is now available for purchase, and you can do so right here on our homepage. Just click the Futurist icon, and it'll take you to Amazon where you can buy it. In The Futurist, The Life and Films of James Cameron, Miss Keegan dissects the creative mind and unique daredevil spirit that make James Cameron one of the most exciting, cutting-edge filmmakers the medium has ever witnessed. Miss Keegan is a contributor to Time magazine. She's covered the Oscars, Sundance, and Comic-Con, and she's covering the awards season for Vanity Fair. And in fact, just today, she published a wonderful article at Vanity Fair concerning Cameron's groundbreaking female characters. And we discuss those female characters in this interview and a whole lot more. Enjoy. I wanted to know why you chose Cameron as a subject.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think James Cameron is utterly fascinating. And I first met him, I had done a short phone interview with him, but the first time I met him was when I visited the Avatar set in early of 2008. And at the time, there was still a shroud of secrecy surrounding the movie, and I really had no idea what to expect. But I pulled into this dingy warehouse in LA and went inside, and there were a few guys working on computer monitors off in the corner, and then there was this big empty gray soundstage, and it was Cameron and a computer and a camera. And that was it. And he was holding the camera, and to me it was amazing because, as you guys know, first of all, directors don't hold cameras. Not elite directors like Cameron anyway. But it looked to me like this totally postmodern play that was being shot. It didn't look like some big-budget studio movie until he let me look inside his camera lens and see this whole world of Pandora. And at that point, I thought, this is going to be a fascinating movie to watch, how they make it. And this guy seems to only do things that are hard. I'm going to try and stick around if they'll let me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that you've covered fanboys and you've talked about, written about Comic-Con and different trends in movies. And Cameron seems to me probably the ultimate movie tech geek in a way, isn't he?
Totally. I mean, Cameron is a giant 14-year-old boy, basically. And he loves nothing more than to completely geek out on technology. I think the people he looks up to most in the world are scientists, which you see a little bit in the characters in Avatar. And, pretty much since The Abyss, he's been coming up with a world in his mind and trying to figure out how to create the technology he'll need to realize that world. And Avatar is really the ultimate expression of that.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. But he actually gave you his full cooperation for this book, and you spent time with him, speaking to him at length for the book, correct?
Yeah, it took me a while to persuade him. After that first time I visited him, I basically called Lightstorm, his offices, every 2 weeks for about a year, and I would sort of show up where he was making public events where he was. It was a little bit annoying, I think. But yes, when he ultimately sat down and said, okay, Rebecca, you can do this, he was very open. I had a list of about 25 people that were close to him that I wanted his blessing to speak to, and he came back with a list of 50 and allowed me to spend a lot of time on the set at different stages of the production and post-production process. And he was very generous in that way.
Wow. So what surprised you most about him in your discussions with him or your research about him?
Well, I think, everybody knows his reputation for being this sort of artistic tyrant. Mm. And I was very surprised how loyal people are to him and how he seems to inspire people to really do their best work. And I think, yes, he is that guy that you hear about, that guy who's very critical and very intense, but he's also a guy that people seem willing to kind of follow to the end of the earth, whether they're going to the bottom of the ocean or, in the case of Avatar, whether they're creating all this new technology that's hugely complex. One of the sort of set catchphrases that was written on a whiteboard on the Avatar set was, it's Avatar, dude, nothing works the first time. And you realize, you know, this is a whole group of people who are making a movie in a way that they had no idea if it was going to work, and they went with him.
You talk about him being a tyrant, an artistic tyrant, but has he mellowed at all? Because there are accounts in the earlier films of that kind of quality that he had, but it seems like he might have mellowed a little bit.
You know, I think it would be hard to use the word mellow to ever describe James Cameron, but I will say, you know, I talked to him about the fact that in these years in between Titanic and Avatar, he spent a lot of time doing these deep sea dives, filming these documentaries, and was often in real life or death situations and having to make decisions about people's safety and do we continue even though there's a hurricane on the way. And he told me that in the process of filming those movies, he started to really change his view about management and about what you do to bring a movie to fruition. And he said it became less about having temper tantrums and the movie is the only thing that matters. And he started to really step back a little bit and take in the larger picture. So I think that changed his management style a little bit.
Yeah. Jerry, were you about to say something and I interrupted? I'm sorry.
Sorry. I just wanted, because, you know, I've been reading all this stuff the last couple of weeks about Cameron. I think one of the most important things to realize about him is that he's been gone so long. It was always considered, like, when he returned to narrative filmmaking, it would be something that was worth his while. It would be something that if you were on the crew, you would follow him to the ends of the earth. Because here's a guy who's changed. He is a game changer every time he comes out with a movie. Mm-hmm. He really sets the bar incredibly high. There have been other people who tried to do that this decade, but it looks like he has come in and really set the world on fire this time.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, if you look at I can't think of another director who, at the prime of his career, at the peak that Cameron was after Titanic, I mean, he could have really made any movie he wanted to make. Mm-hmm. Would have stepped back and said, you know what, I want to really explore life, and I want to think about what I want to do. And it is that kind of feeling that he gets where he's not going to make a movie unless he is going to break new ground. That I think you're right. I think that inspires people to follow him because they know they're going to be part of something really unique.
Another thing, though, I wanted to ask is because this is something he was at. One of the reasons I remember when The Abyss came out, he made it because he was getting sick of the people saying that he was only obsessed with hardware, like with technology. And he had really reached a breaking point, actually, in one of the interviews, and he said, you know, that's not true. That's why I made The Abyss. I wanted to show that I care about characters. And if you look at his other films, he does care about characters. He has some of the best written female characters of all time. He really does care. But I was curious, with this film, since it is so, the technology is so the main event, is he concerned at all that people are just going to label him as a hardware fanatic?
I don't know if he's concerned. You know, it's not something I talked to him about, but you're right about his characters, and I think his female characters in particular are as groundbreaking as his technology. And I just wrote a piece that just went up on VanityFair.com about his female characters, and I think the female characters in Avatar are as forward-looking as Sarah Connor and as Ripley was in Aliens and Lindsay Brigman was in The Abyss. I mean, they're even if you just look at Sigourney Weaver, I mean, she plays a scientist. The character of Neytiri isn't just love interest. She has all these other qualities to her, which, if you compare it to the other movies in its category, you know, comic book movies, what women get to do in those movies is basically scream and dangle from buildings and be strapped to bombs. I mean, so he's totally in another league when it comes to the attention he pays his female characters.
I think so too, and I put him up there with Woody Allen, with a penchant for writing female characters, right. Obviously for a completely different genre of film. But and then I would
like to see those two work together. Actually, I think yeah. Woody could help him on his dialogue a little bit.
I think so too. But and I see his ex-wives, and I think he's very attracted to strong women. And did he have a strong kind of mother presence in his life? Were there a history of being surrounded by strong women that
Yeah, I interviewed his mom for the book, Shirley, and she is a spitfire. I mean, Shirley she was a mother of 5, and in Ontario, Canada, in the 1950s, when what women were supposed to do was be homemakers, Shirley had, at that point, 3 young kids, and she went out and joined the Army and spent her weekends, trooping through fields in the rain and learning how to assemble a gun blindfolded. She was a painter. She took science classes for fun. I mean, she's really a fascinating woman. Probably in another time would have had an amazing career in some field. And I think Cameron's view of women was really informed by her.
That sounds like Sarah Connor you just described.
She is. She's like Sarah. I told her, I said, you're Sarah Connor trapped in the body of a Canadian grandmother. And she's just, oh, no. No, not me.
You'd mentioned the long break. It was kind of a introspective break that he took after Titanic. And as movie fans at a distance, I was always waiting for the announcement of the next Cameron movie. And my thought was maybe what kind of a role did possibly fear play in that hiatus?
It's interesting. When I asked him about why he took so long, Cameron told me he had no intention of spending that much time sort of out of the mix. Initially, it was that he was going to just take a year or 2 off and do these documentary projects. And then he had a number of movies that he was working on that didn't come together for one reason or another. Then he decided to move ahead on Avatar, and it was clear that the technology was going to require years to put it together. Other people I interviewed, like Peter Chernin, who had been the head of Fox during Titanic, was also, like you, saying, gunning for the next Cameron movie, ready to greenlight it, wanting to go. And everybody was sort of hesitant to try and psychoanalyze Cameron, but he conceded that after a success like Titanic, there can be a feeling of, gosh, how do I follow this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But with Titanic, and every movie of his is, well, not every film. It's artistically successful, The Abyss, but it didn't make a massive return on its investment, I don't believe. But
The Abyss made back its money, but just barely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But after you make the biggest movie of all time, and every movie out, all the ink that's dedicated to those movies, inevitably they mention this is the new most expensive movie ever made, and
right.
He's obviously a man of epic tastes, and he loves the spectacle. But has he ever had a desire to direct a small, more intimate film? He
expresses that desire after every big movie, and then never actually makes it. Mm-hmm. After Terminator 2, he had a script called The Crowded Room, which was about, which is a great script, actually. You can download it online, and it's about a guy who has multiple personality disorder, which would have been a smaller budget film, which he didn't end up making. And he has another a script that he's got, in his back pocket right now called The Dive, about a couple who were divers. That could be a very inexpensive film. Now, whether he'll actually someday make one of those small films, I'd like to see him do that. Mm-hmm. It's hard to imagine, if Avatar does well and a sequel rolls along and the train leaves the station, it's hard to imagine him taking the time to do that. But I would like to see it.
You talked about characters and his strength with female characters. What about story? Do you think he's appreciated as a storyteller as much as he should be?
I think Cameron has some incredible strengths as a storyteller, and I think he has some weaknesses. And I think one of his strengths is structure. He's really good. I think Titanic was a beautifully structured script, the kind of way he framed it with the present-day story. I think one of his weaknesses maybe is that he stuffs a lot of story in there, and oftentimes too much for the movie. His movies tend to run quite long. He often finds himself, in this next circle of hell in the editing room, trying to pare them down into something that is a commercial length. So right. I do think he's underestimated as a storyteller, and I think he if he suffers from anything, it's an abundance of ideas, and sometimes it's hard to sort of cue that in.
I think that's so beautiful, though, because there's so many films that aren't about anything. So
I know.
I'm very thankful that somebody has too many ideas.
I know, me too.
Yeah, and you talked about his dialogue. He admits that his dialogue needs work. I was very surprised. He's very open about that.
Yeah, he at one point I interviewed him about the script he wrote, Strange Days, which Catherine Bigelow directed, and that's the script where he says he's most proud of his dialogue, and he really worked hard to get a sort of natural-sounding speech. The interesting thing is he takes a lot of knocks for his dialogue, but he also has written some lines that have become the most memorable.
Yeah, that's
right. Hasta la vista, baby. And I think there's a great line, actually, in Avatar that Michelle Rodriguez's character says, "You're not the only one with a gun, bitch," which I think is going to be, I think that's going to be, this movie's Get Away From Her, You Bitch.
Yeah.
Right. But it also in his films there is always a sociological message. There's a message underlying the tremendous action, and that seems to be very important to him. And in Avatar too, we're hearing about the parallels to Vietnam and Iraq, and so that's relevant to his work as well, right?
Right. Yeah, and the environment. Yeah, you're never going to see him make a movie like The Hangover that's just about a good time. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with a movie that's just about a good time. I just don't think Cameron has any interest in making one. Mm-hmm. And Avatar has a lot of Vietnam imagery in it, in the kinds of equipment and helicopters that they designed. There's lines that seem ripped right from the headlines about shock and awe and the war on terror. And there's also an environmental message that is impossible to miss.
Have you seen Avatar?
I have. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, what kind of take do you have on it after you've finally seen the finished product?
I think visually he completely delivered on what he claimed he was going to do. Cameron always makes these bold proclamations, and people, go, oh yeah, king of the world, shut up. And the thing is, he delivers, and he did. I mean, Pandora is magnificent. The creatures are wildly fantastical. The plant life, there's such imagination and thought put into it. I think the story is pretty complicated, and people are going to want to see it, to sort of absorb the story. That was my one concern watching it. It's like, wow, this is a complex story, and it takes a little bit to absorb it. But I think he really did what he said he was going to do, and I think he changed the way movies are going to look.
It seems that it could be similar to Titanic in that it will not be, my opinion, it will not be a one-weekend movie. It'll be something that people hear about. You have to experience this once the public gets in to see it, and people will go on subsequent weekends. Do you think it's this enormous gamble? Do you think it's going to pay off?
I think it will pay off. Yeah, I do. I think it will be a little bit different from Titanic. Titanic was so anomalous. The biggest single ticket sales day for Titanic was Valentine's Day, 2 months nearly after it opened. That movie just kept going and going and going. And I think Avatar will go for a good long time. It's not going to be a one-weekend movie. But I can't imagine another movie ever sticking around as long as Titanic did.
Well, that had a big female audience too that went 4 or 5 times, and they're trying to sell Avatar the love story, and I know Cameron says that ultimately this film turned out to be a love story in the end. So I'm wondering if that marketing strategy will stick.
It'll be interesting to see. He says all his movies are love stories, and you really can watch them all that way. Mm-hmm. I think that the female characters in Avatar are extraordinary, and I think in some ways the trailers don't necessarily play to a female audience. I think if women start going, if they get dragged by their boyfriend and then they go tell their girlfriend, like, no, Michelle Rodriguez's character is a total badass, or Neytiri is actually pretty cool, that it will help how the movie does among women.
Yeah. Well, with the Golden Globes that came out today, we're recording this on a Tuesday when they just came out. Avatar was well represented, and I know that you cover the award season for Vanity Fair, I believe. So what do you think its chances are in that arena? I'm asking all these questions really selfishly because I'm crazy about Cameron, and I have a $200 bet going that it's going to be nominated.
Well, you know what? Fox has a much bigger bet than that, so you've got
Yes.
some other people behind you. You know, it'd be interesting to see with the Best Picture category having 10 movies that can be nominated. Be interesting to see if Avatar is nominated in that category. You know, traditionally the Academy is incredibly unimpressed by sci-fi. When Aliens got a number of nominations, including an acting nomination for Sigourney Weaver, it was the first time an actor had ever been nominated for a science fiction film. So, and clearly, I mean, Titanic got a record-tying 11 nominations. Clearly, the Academy has shown that they are willing to give Cameron's movies a serious look. You know, the problem with Avatar is the Academy members are older, and they're actors, a lot of them. And actors are very afraid of CGI, and older audiences are not necessarily interested in a movie that's so heavily CGI. So that'll make it tricky with the Academy. But I think the fact that there's 10 possible Best Pictures will be helpful for the movie.
I think so too. And part of what makes this movie unique from an acting standpoint, and I've read, I think Mike Clark wrote something that he thinks that Zoe Saldana should be considered for Best Actress, is that it's really all them in this movie. It's their complete physicality. It's them. It's not animation.
Well, and what's interesting, I mean, when you look at Zoe Saldana's performance, it's really both her and, you know, hundreds of guys at Weta Digital in New Zealand manipulating her performance. I mean, yes, it is her, and when she snarls and when she jumps, it's Zoe. But there's also a whole other element to the performance, and I actually wonder if someday there will be a category for this particular kind of performance, because you really should reward both the actor and the army of digital artists who enable the visuals.
Yeah, I think that she has a shot, because there was a whole movement back in 2002 when The Two Towers came out for Andy Serkis for Golem. You know, there's a whole movement to get him. I think they've moved, obviously, it seems like the technology's even 7 years later, way more advanced, and it's not insulting to the actor, any actor really, because you need them to do this. You can't do it without them. I don't think that's something that needs to be stressed to a lot of people. It's not here to replace.
Yeah, Andy Serkis's performance was the breakthrough. I mean, here was a Shakespearean-trained actor, and you could clearly see his face and clearly see his movements in this CG character. And I think that really, you're right, I think that really broke through and showed people that this medium is really a merger of technology and performance.
Yeah. Well, Rebecca, this book is fantastic. It's called The Futurist. It's available on our homepage where our listeners are tuning into the show for purchase. And I really appreciate your time and giving us the opportunity to geek out about Cameron with you.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to have people to geek out with.
That's great. Thank
you.
Thank
you,
Rebecca.
Guys.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Our next guest, our final guest, is actor Stephen Lang. He is an accomplished actor of the stage and screen whose credits include Gettysburg, Tombstone, Last Exit to Brooklyn, The Hard Way.
Hey, you got it,
I laugh at The Hard Way because I love it so much. And actually, Chris and I, our other movie geek, Chris, we laugh about The Hard Way all the time because we like it. And that scene with Stephen Lang where he's talking back to the TV screen to James Woods, like, me to you, me to you. It's corny. He was also in Public Enemies.
He was actually
recently.
very good. I liked him in Public Enemies. I thought he was very good.
Yeah, really. In Avatar, he plays Colonel Miles Quaritch. And here he talks to us about his experience working with two of the most demanding filmmakers back-to-back in Michael Mann and James Cameron, and the unique challenges that he faced playing within the Avatar universe. Here's Stephen Lang. I'm wondering, how did this opportunity come about for you?
I was doing a play in New York, that a play I wrote. It's a solo performance about the Medal of Honor. And, there was an ad every day in the Times. There was kind of a picture of me, sort of a macho picture. Right. And Jim Cameron, who was, knee-deep in Avatar back in '07, saw it and remembered that we'd had a meeting some years ago, and I received a call saying, that Jim Cameron would like you to read a script.
Wow.
And I said, okay. Okay. And I read it, and I thought it was pretty remarkable. And then we had a long talk on the phone, and I ended up, after my final performance of the week on a Sunday afternoon, went out and met up with him at his place, and we talked and worked for an hour or so, and that was it. And he asked me to do the role, so that's how it worked.
You've played several military men.
Yeah.
Do you come from that background? Were you in the military yourself, or is this something you just fell into as an actor?
Well, I was not in the military. I think if circumstances in life had been different, I might have done that. I think I have a good head for it, I think I respond to authority well, I think. But I really like playing generals and colonels.
Yes.
Yeah.
Strong characters.
So yeah. I suppose you could say I like giving orders also. But,
right.
No, I mean, I figure I've ended up playing all these military guys because I have good posture and no other reason, basically.
I'm sure it's more than that.
That must be
that. I look over your resume, and you've been in so many films that I love, and you've given great performances in all of them, and I see that you switch from big screen to TV to stage very frequently, and your stage credits are impeccable. That must be a dream for a working actor, to be able to switch between all those different formats of performance.
Yeah, I suppose it is. It's been an interesting career, and at this point, it's been fairly lengthy, I guess. I think that I always felt that for a long time, I got roles that people didn't really know what to do with them. Mm-hmm. Whether it was on, whatever the medium was. But it's nice to be able to bounce back and forth, and one tends to make you miss the other. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm very happy to be doing what I'm doing, but there was a period from about 2003 through 2007 where I might have done 2 films during that time. I was on stage the whole time. So
right.
Avatar came along at a really wonderful time. I was really ready to take a break from 8 a week,
Yeah.
And since then, I haven't done a play. And it's just the other day was, less than a week ago was the first time I sort of had an internal rumbling that was, I felt like working on stage again.
Yeah.
So, let's see. But, things have I think that it's probably good that it works this way for me because there's just that much more in terms of opportunity, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm not just limited to one or the other. So I'm really thankful it's worked out that way.
Amongst the last few movies that you've done, the last 2 movies that we've seen you in, you've worked under Michael Mann in Public Enemies,
right.
And now James Cameron in Avatar. Right. And from just an outsider's perspective as a big movie fan, yeah. They would seem to me to be similar personalities in their kind of meticulous nature. Do you find that the case?
Nobody works harder, I think, on a set. And by working hard, I really do mean focus and engagement,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting also, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but I think it's very, very interesting that both of them tend to operate a lot, Mm-hmm. I mean, they like to be behind the camera. So So there's a very, very intimate engagement with them. Jim told me one time, actually when I met him out in California, when he slung a camera up, he said, you know, I really think through the lens. I said, okay, great. So in those respects, I think they're similar. I think their worldviews are somewhat different, however, you know, which is interesting, because I think that Michael, well, I think Jim, if you look at his films, and I think if you look at Avatar, for all the subtleties that are in the film, I think the worldview, or the difference, say, between the good guys and the bad guys is quite clear, you know? If you think of a film like Titanic, there's no mistaking where the sympathies lie, where an audience sympathies are supposed to lie in that film, you know? It seems to me his bad guys tend to be pretty bad, although I put a footnote on that when it comes to Avatar, because, you know, I play what is, I guess, could be characterized as the villain of the piece, which I don't really, that's unplayable, so what does that mean to me? But what I was going to say then about Michael, I think Michael has a much more ambiguous worldview. And if you look at so many of his films, certainly Public Enemies, there's a tremendous amount of corruption on the sides of the law, ostensibly the good guys, and there's an awful lot of nobility and a sense of mission and righteousness on the sides of the criminals. It seems
and certainly true of something like Heat as well. When you have you know, they're both so similar in that they're so laser focused, but they're both sympathetic, and they both lose so much because of what they do. You know.
And that's that's a theme that Michael has worked with before. I mean, I did a series called Crime Story with Michael.
Yeah.
And if you look at that, I mean, it's just there's a total ambiguity as to, you know, who's good and who's bad.
Yeah.
In that thing. So I think that it's a difference in world view there, maybe a difference in themes that sort of grab them, but that's thematic. You know, that's not, we're not talking about the way to work, but in terms of working, they're both extremely demanding, and I find it a lot of fun, because they both just demand, not by saying it, but just by example, that you come fully loaded.
Well, you mentioned something that I actually had a question about, which is that they both operate the camera largely.
Yeah.
How does that assist you as an actor when the director is right there in your face, essentially, as opposed to, you know, off in a distance watching it on a monitor?
Well, it can be, if you're working in, say, performance capture, it can be a extremely intimate relationship, because he may be talking during the take. I mean, it becomes something of a duet between yourself and the director or camera, and the same can be true of Michael, who will kind of annotate, or, you know, takes in a way, and so to me, it becomes very much, I guess the word I would use is there's sort of an intimacy to it. You know, you're not, then there are other times, just because circumstantially, you know, he's 50 yards away. You know, that can happen as well. But a lot of times when the camera is right there, there's not a lot between you and your director. Not a lot, you know what I mean? Not a lot of space between them.
You mentioned loving the script, obviously, that you were sent. And I've read quotes from other actors that read Cameron's scripts and say that they don't necessarily read like any other screenplays they've received. Is there something unique about him as a writer, actually reading his scripts? How do they read for you?
Well, you know, he's very well schooled. He's very well steeped, I'd say, in literature. Both in classical literature and I think in science, and so there's a real there's a kind of a certainty and an authority that one reads in the script. I think he delineates characters very, very clearly. And when I read Avatar, he described a world that is impossible, right? I mean, he described a world that doesn't exist as we know it, and yet, and this is something I never even considered at the time. I never ever doubted the fact that this would be brought to life, you know, and that's not just because I have confidence in the technology or that confidence in Jim as a director. I think it has to do with the authority of the writing. You know, when you read any great piece of literature, it doesn't matter whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, or just classical literature. I mean, when you read War and Peace, you're there. You know what Tolstoy paints a very, very, very clear picture of it. And you have the reality, just as Tolkien does. He creates an imaginary world, which becomes very, very real in our imagination. And I mean, it's a mark of really good writing that we associate much of the time with novelists, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that Jim did that very, very strongly in the screenplay. His powers of description are very, very strong, and you understand, I think, his characters at a glance, which is not to say that they're simple. It's just that you go, okay, I know who this is. I feel this guy. I feel, yes. Oh, I see where she's coming from.
In terms of character and your character, you've mentioned that some people could classify him as the villain of the piece, but we always talk about the so-called villain as always the hero of their own story. So can you tell me a little bit about your character in this one?
Well, he's the head of security at Hell's Gate, which is the human compound on Pandora, and so as such, his mission is to basically keep people alive in a situation where that's extremely difficult. The odds are long on a daily basis. It's an unfriendly environment, and it's populated by unfriendly beings, or at least unfriendly to us. And I think it's he basically lives and breathes the mission, and I think he takes each breach of security, each loss, quite personally. He's very, very invested in his job, and I think to some extent he's defined by it, you know. And when you and on paper, that what's wrong with that, you know?
Yeah.
He's trying to do his job. He's trying to do what he was hired for, keep his people alive. But he's very interesting too, because his history comes out of he was served 3 tours in the Marines back on Earth in a future that we postulate as being one where the wars are even filthier and dirtier than they are now. Mm. Okay, and I think that, and I think, but I think that the sales pitch, the reason one joins in the first place, there's talk about when people would see old Randolph Scott movies or something back in 1941 or something, they'd rush off to join the Marines, and the reality was quite different than the reason they joined. I think people join, and I think Quaritch certainly joins up because of this desire to this internal need for to perform with honor, to do duty, to display courage, to basically all these positive attributes, and then quite idealistic. And I think the reality is quite different. And I think that can have a really, really deadening effect on the soul. I think at some point, enough death and destruction, enough lack of the total absence of any kind of legitimate rules of engagement can breed a cynicism in you, and which I think is the most deadly of all characteristics you can have, because it's kind of what it means to me is an absence of hope, and I think that he just lives for the job, and he's defined by his own ability to do the job.
Well, you're talking about all of the character attributes and all the work you do to build a character, and I would think as an actor, when you go on a set, especially one as big as Avatar, it probably takes you a little while to find your footing. Was there a moment in the shooting where you thought, oh, okay, yes, I have this guy?
I think that there's almost, well, in a sense, there's not time for that, and in a sense, there's all the time in the world for that. So what do I mean? I mean, I remember very well the first scenes that I shot for it were in the Armor Bay, which is a great place for me because it's kind of my home, as Quaritch, and it was. I felt ready. I felt prepared, and at the same time, you're so adrenalized that maybe there's too much brake on your curveball, or you're throwing so much heat that you're wild, and it takes a little while to kind of just develop the kind of work sweat that you need to get into a rhythm. But I mean, not to sound like an old fart or anything, I've been doing this for so long that that's familiar to me. You know what I mean? This sort of feeling, okay, I got to get in the groove now. And with Jim and with Sam, who I was working with on those first days, it was very, it came about quite naturally. But I do remember that a lot of the first stuff I did involved my AMP suit, which is my armored mobile platform, which is kind of an extension of myself. And it's a big, the sucker's like 14 feet tall, and you got to scramble up the side of it. And I spent days and days before that just climbing in and out of that beast, familiarizing myself so I could strap in. So I could get it going. So I felt totally at home, or I looked like I was totally at home in that suit. And so that was, and a lot of times if you can, what I was talking about before, in terms of the depth of the character and everything, there's not much you're going to do with that. Either, that stuff you talk about, you decide about, and it's there or it's not there. But there are certain mechanical tasks, which is really what I like to focus on when I act, because the other stuff, you've grounded yourself in it, and presumably it'll take care of itself, But when it comes down to, I have to get this body roll correct. I have to ride this horse as if I've been riding every day for the past 30 years, as if I were born on one. I have to operate this AMP suit as if it's an extension of my arms and legs, my entire body. So that kind of stuff is all really doable because it's a very material task, and that's the way I went at it. This role, yeah.
Well,
I remember it was really important to me. I wanted to be able to. I remember firing off my weapon at one point, and I'm talking to, a squad at the same time as I'm reloading, which means I'm reloading. So I got to be able to reload this sucker without ever looking down at it. And I mean, it just goes without saying that I know what I'm going to say to these guys, which is really the point of the scene, right? I mean, what I'm talking about, what I'm communicating. But to me, the object is, to reload as if it's second nature and everything. I like to focus on tasks like that.
Well, isn't it kind of, I think I've heard it before, action is character?
Yeah. I mean, and character is... and story is character, too. I mean, character is defined by it. I mean, I don't know, I mean, I suppose, yes, action, lack of, whatever. That's what you use to define it, the speed with which you move, what you're doing. I would say that necessity is character, and what I would mean by that is, like, the crucial question that I would ask in any scene is, what do I need? Mm-hmm. What do I need? Do I need a drink of water? Do I need to be slapped? Do I need some sleep? Do I need to be loved? What do I need? Well, as long as you keep it, you don't always come up with the answer, but to me, that's what defines character is kind of necessity.
With Avatar, this is, I would imagine, the most special effects kind of heavy project you've done. Mm-hmm. What's that different discipline? I would think that it calls upon your imagination entirely, more so than most other projects might.
It does, except when it doesn't. I mean, one of the last things. Yes, you're right. When you're in command of your dragon warship, and you've got 1,000 screaming banshees all around you, then you're thrown upon your imagination. Mm-hmm. to a very large extent, and for sure. On the other hand, I mean, I remember, one day Jim says, "So, Slang, is it cool if we incinerate you today?" Yeah, sure, man, absolutely. And so they build a fire on my shoulder. So there was nothing imaginative about that. It was like, okay, I got a fire going on my shoulder. Let's roll, and then when we're done, I'll put the fire out, and we'll light it again, and we'll do it again. So it was a never-ending. It was great. There was all kinds of different ways of going about that. There was a very varied kind of approach on this film because there's live action, there's stuff that's a combination of live action and performance capture. There's straight performance capture. There's a ton of green screen. It was really. What do we got today,
Wow. How much of it have you seen?
I've seen it, the film.
Oh, you've seen the finished product.
Well, I haven't seen it in 6 weeks or so, which means that it's more finished than when I did see it. But, yes, I have seen it, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty glorious. But I haven't seen it on the humongous screen yet. I mean, I've seen it 3D, but I haven't seen it on a, IMAX screen. So I'm looking forward to that.
The big question about the film is it a game changer? And I guess that refers to the technology and do you feel a new era with this film somehow?
Well, are you? I guess you're talking about the whole. Is that the 3D aspect?
Well, the whole experience of it. We've heard you've never seen this. Yeah. This film before, this environment before. This can be a real path to what the future of movies might look like.
Well, I suppose that can be true, but I would also. I remember when I saw T2, mm-hmm. And they had that amazing thing where he sort of melted or got all silvery or something. You remember, you know what I'm talking about? He did this morphing thing. And I'd never seen that before, and I don't think it had been done before. And I swear to God, within 2 months, I saw it in a Pepto-Bismol commercial. It's the same thing. So to me, the question, I'm not sure that the question's one thing, but I do know that as an audience, as a species, we adapt very, very quickly. And the appetite for something new is kind of never-ending. So I think what becomes, a game changer, as it were, what becomes this remarkable thing, will gain acceptance, will become a norm very, very quick, or one of the norms, because there's still, there are plenty of films that will just be not made that way, but we'll always, we're always going to have an appetite for something new. So in that sense, I mean, I guess you're always going to have people out there who are kind of pushing the envelope on the technology, but in the end, it's all about story.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, that, you know, end of story. Because if you can have, you know, the most game-changing kind of technology in the world, and unless you've got a great story, a classic story, you're not going to have a great or a classic film. You're going to have something. But I think, you know, what you really want to do is you want to make something remarkable. I know that that's what Jim Cameron and John Landau set out to do, is to make something truly remarkable. And the technology is a servant of that, it seems to me, you know, because finally what it's about is a story with characters that people really, really care about and want to see more of.
That's what I think has been missing from the dialogue, and I'm sure it'll come up once people start to see the film, is that all the technology's fine, but unless the film moves you or you're invested in the story or the characters in some way, the movie's not going to last no matter what technology is behind it. So, and Cameron is a master storyteller. I mean, he's the best at that.
Yeah, that's it. That's the deal right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I see it. That's the way I've seen it. I mean, when I think of the films that I love, the films that have stayed with me forever, it's totally got to do with a story that had me on the edge of my seat no matter how many times, you know, I see it.
Yeah.
Which I can watch endlessly just to watch the nuances of the way the story is told.
Well, I cannot wait. This is, I've been salivating over this for so long. So I appreciate your time so much, and let's do it again, and when we can talk more about performance and about the remainder of your career.
Excellent. Anytime. Always happy to. Always happy to talk about me.